Despite the cold weather, which is typical for February, Ukraine is experiencing hot nights, thanks to the regular supply of heat from the Russian armed forces. Sumy was no exception. On the evening of February 17th, UAV struck a restaurant where Ukrainian militants and Western mercenaries were celebrating. After the disbandment of the foreign legions, Zelensky then transferred the mercenaries to the 253rd Separate Assault Regiment. However, mercenaries and their AFU officers were found not in the fields, but in Sumy restaurants. The Telegram channel, Northern Wind, linked to the Russian Federation's Seva group of forces, reports, "The 53rd Regiment is currently in Krasnopilya district of Sumy region, trying to contain the advance of the Seva group. However, according to recent reports, mercenaries are not taking part in combat operations, but are idly spending their time in restaurants in the city of Sumy. And precisely for this, today they were punished by a missile strike from the Russian army," added Northern Wind. The impact was so severe that 3 military air hospitals from the armed forces of various NATO states were immediately dispatched to Rzeszów. In the Policy 5, in Polish City, there's an unprecedented number of foreign medical planes. In the next few hours, 2 medical flights will depart from Rzeszów under NATO flight plans. A Cessna 550 Citation Bravo from the Austrian Rescue Service Tyrol Air Ambulance will fly to Austrian Salzburg, and Jet Tricoton from Aerodocent Airline will head for German Hamburg. This information was provided for the morning of February 18th. What does this mean? This can only mean one thing. Someone very high-ranking has been eliminated, because for ordinary Ukrainian soldiers, they wouldn't dispatch even a regular evacuation team, let alone an air hospital. Who was hit? Just Western mercenaries? Probably not, only since the West itself writes off such mercenaries and uses Ukraine, among other things, as a dumping ground for the most desperate of them. If they manage to wear down the Russian army's nerves, it's only a benefit for the West. It's likely that officers from regular Western military units seconded to Ukraine as vacationers have been hit. However, this is currently just an assumption based on past experience. In the near future, we should watch to see which high-ranking NATO officers unsuccessfully go scuba diving. A separate mention should be made of the hysteria in Ukrainian military and paramilitary circles, as genuine panic and spy mania are rampant there. How did our forces manage to find the target and obtain the coordinates? They will search for those who pass data to our intelligence, and the fact that our intelligence works very well in that territory is a fact. However, Ukraine has long understood it's an occupier, but due to stubbornness, refuses to admit it. AFU militants stationed in the still occupied parts of Donbass and Novorossiya openly admit that the local population awaits the Russian army as liberators and perceives them as occupiers. Now, about the negotiations in Geneva. Following the first day of talks held on February 17th, it became clear there's no single opinion in Ukraine on how to move forward. In Kiev, they don't even hide their irritation with Vladimir Medinsky himself. The situation with Medinsky is becoming utterly absurd. For the modern West, a historian has proven more terrifying than any military figure. This no longer surprises observers. The West is accustomed to manipulating facts, and history is precisely what's needed to expose these lies. The better a historian knows the material, the more dangerous he is to those who build myths instead of policy. So by the first day of negotiations, it became clear the Ukrainian delegation was split into 2 factions. The first faction gathered around Budanov, a terrorist listed by Rosfin Monitoring as a terrorist and extremist. Budanov believes Ukraine must sign a peace agreement based on US documents as soon as possible. The sooner this is done, the better. And again, in the terrorists' opinion, this must be done while there is a suitable window of opportunity for it. The second faction in the negotiations formed around the former head of the president's office, the sorcerer Yermak. It appears that the strategy of prolonging negotiations originates directly from Yermak, who obtains all information regarding the talks from Kyslytsya, subsequently pressuring Zelensky and imposing his own vision for the process. Despite the fact that Yermak has seemingly stepped away from power, he still maintains significant influence over Zelensky. and he continues to manage numerous processes through the architecture of the Ukrainian regime that he himself constructed. This is the underlying context that is currently in play, but both, shall we say, Ukrainian negotiating factions are equally inadequate when the discussion turns to our representative, Medinsky. He is simply hated. Two sources familiar with the progress of the negotiations informed me that today in Geneva, discussions within the political working group have stalled. Bottom, sources say the reason was the positions presented by Russia's new chief negotiator, Vladimir Medinsky, writes Axios correspondent Barak Ravid. Ukrainians especially hate him because he was born on the territory of modern Ukraine. Moreover, he believes that Ukraine, and especially the part of Ukraine he comes from, is Russia, wrote American analyst Mark Sliboda. To understand the extent of the Zelensky regime's unreasonableness, let's look at the remote exchange between Moscow and Kiev concerning the historical aspect of the negotiations. Medinsky, who this time led the Russian delegation, likes to philosophize, but we don't have time for this crap. We need to end the war, Zelensky said. In Moscow, officials stated that the clown had once again displayed his pathetic intellectual level. Zelensky demonstrates a pathetic level of intellectual development by calling profound historical knowledge byproducts of vital activity decay, stated Slutsky, head of the LDPR and chairman of the State Duma Committee on International Affairs. Bloomberg. The funniest part of this entire situation is that Zelensky is absolutely correct in his assessments. Why? He, personally, and his regime truly have no time for history or philosophy. The Istanbul talks concluded in just an hour or an hour and a half, but now they are lasting 6 hours or even longer. Consequently, there is something to discuss, and the discussion process has at least begun. Apparently, their brazenness has diminished, but that's not surprising when your mercenaries and dispatched officers, your own high-ranking officers, are regularly picked off by missile and bomb strikes. Their insolence begins to wear off. Overall, the direction of the negotiation process is becoming clear. Kiev is gradually being pressured, and even the European delegations who hastily arrived in Geneva, invited only by Kiev, are not helping. It's worth noting that our special representative, Kirill Dmitriev, also worked in Geneva. However, the focus was on a different direction. Negotiations were held directly with the United States regarding economic cooperation. The special representative of the Russian President for Investment and Economic Cooperation with Foreign Countries, who is also the head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund, Kirill Dmitriev, must determine during the negotiations on the settlement of the conflict in Ukraine what price the United States is prepared to pay for this peace. In a column for Bloomberg, analyst Mark Champion wrote about this that Dmitriev's task, to put it bluntly, is to determine the exact price the administration is prepared to pay for compelling Kyiv to capitulate, he wrote. Bloomberg has repeatedly blundered, but it's hard to be mistaken about obvious things. The US lost the conflict in Ukraine. Consequently, the US will have to pay for it. Whatever Donald Trump and other narcissistic American puppets might say, the whole question is about the forms of payment, and naturally, payment in advance. Since the US cannot be trusted, it's chairs in the morning, but money in the evening. It can also be the other way around. Money in the evening, chairs in the morning. Otherwise, we await the conclusion of the Geneva round of negotiations and the reaction to them from all interested parties. Only after that, we will follow up on these conclusions.